Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Stacey. I'm a consultant anaesthetist and also one of the associate deans for HEIW. And this is a recorded presentation regarding strategies to perhaps help you consider why or you should cycle to work. It's been recorded at the time in the middle of the COVID crisis, so it's done at an appropriate social distancing level. The first question I'm going to ask everybody is, how many of you have actually got a bike? And if you have one, how often do you ride it? And if you haven't got one, have you thought about buying one? Well, hopefully I can encourage you, if you have got one, to get it out, and if you haven't got one, to consider adding one to your stable. So this is me turning up for a session in HEIW in the times when we're allowed to go there. I cycle about, well, anything between 6 and 10 miles, so I'm wearing appropriate gear, and that particular day, looking at my outfit, it was probably pretty wet, hence the all-over gear. 5 minutes later, I'm good to go. I carry a change of clothes in my rucksack or keep a change of clothes at the various places that I work in, and that enables me to swap from a cycling gear setup to a slightly more formal look. I arrive at my venue, and for those of you who work at HEIW, you'll be familiar with this nice secure bike shed that we have outside the building. If I'm actually traveling to one of the hospitals that I work in, I always ensure that my bike is locked to something secure. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But let's start with a couple of questions. So the first question is, and before I move on to discuss some of my own answers to this question, I'm going to encourage you to get a blank piece of paper and ask yourself, what are the reasons you should cycle to work? Okay, so these are some of the answers that I might have to that question. Money, well, there is no doubt that having a bike can decrease the expenditure that you expend on running a car. You may have to have a car in addition, so you may think of that as a dual expense. It's definitely green, and I certainly have found over the years, although I do have a car, I actually do less mileage in my car per year than I do actually on commuting on my bike. And it also means that the running expenses of my car are considerably decreased. Certainly things like petrol hardly ever put into the vehicle. What about health? Well, I'll expand on that on the next slide, because I think that's certainly worth considering for all of us, particularly in the current COVID situation. It's fun, riding a bike is great fun, and if you rode one as a child, you'll probably remember the fun that you had on it. Interestingly, at the moment, the weather has been very kind to us. It's been sunny and it's been dry, and one of the, I suppose, small advantages of having the COVID crisis is that there's minimal traffic on the roads, which means that it's a lot quieter and it's a lot more pleasant to cycle, particularly if you're taking children out. It's also safer. And in addition, one of your backup plans is that if your bike breaks down, you can always be picked up by a local taxi company. So it's worth carrying that kind of app on your phone. If you look at the health benefits of regular cycling, they are quite considerable. There's no doubt there's increased cardiovascular fitness, improved muscle strength and flexibility. Although if you do too much cycling, you've got to make sure that your flexibility is optimized in other ways. Improved joint mobility, undoubtedly decrease stress levels. I've been riding a bike to work for many years, and I consider it part of my active stress management program. Why is stress management so important? Well, there's no doubt that if you have a good management of your stress levels, that improves your immune system, and at the moment that's probably the only real weapon we've got against this current virus. Again, if your bike is set up correctly, it can improve your posture, undoubtedly improves your balance, strengthens your bones, decreases fat levels, and can prevent or manage other diseases. Again, there's no doubt that exercise is a hugely important component of maximizing our day and maximizing our performance and work. If you cycle to work, then you don't have to necessarily worry about booking a place at the gym. What you may find as well is that if you cycle to work, you start cycling in other ways. You might start cycling, doing cyclosportives, for example, or longer distances. My sort of maximum distance, if I'm cycling to give a teaching session, is around about 2 hours. So I have cycled to Swansea before to give lectures, although I have to confess I do usually get a lift back. Newport, on the other hand, is a bit more manageable, and if the weather's nice, that's a very pleasant way to spend a couple of hours on your way there and on your way back. It also means that if you're doing a fair amount of cycling, you don't have to do any other training. So, as I say, it keeps me in reasonable physical shape. So those are the summer reasons why you perhaps might consider cycling to work. But I'm going to give you another 30 seconds to consider, why doesn't everybody do it? I mean, it sounds pretty good to me, but why doesn't everybody do it? So 30 seconds on making a list of why you shouldn't cycle to work, or why people don't cycle to work. Okay, well, here's some of the reasons that people will often suggest to me. Well, first, obviously, is the weather. Well, I don't know about you, but in all my years, and I'm getting quite old now, I still haven't worked out a strategy to control the weather. So there's not a heck of a lot you can do about that. Sometimes people say, well, bikes are hideously expensive. Well, they can be, but there's a huge range in the quality and control of bikes available now, and you can spend as much as you want. If you really get into it, as I have over the years, you can end up spending considerable amounts of money on bikes, and having to buy bigger garages to put them in. What about fear? Well, fear is often based around falling or increased traffic. But again, if you're interested, there are strategies to deal with this. You can go on bike handling skills courses. And the nice thing about Cardiff is that there are different routes you can take that minimise your exposure to traffic. The Taff Trail is a particularly good area that you can practice your skills, and as you gain confidence, you can start to consider other routes. Sometimes people say, well, it's too far to cycle, and that's certainly an issue. Again, strategies that you can use to overcome that. You may consider cycling to work and getting the train back, or if you're using a part train, part bike route, or a part car, part bike route. And I'll discuss some strategies and bikes that you can use to maximize your chances. And what about flats? Well, again, tyre technology over the last few years has undoubtedly improved, which means your chances of getting a flat tyre, providing that you keep the tyres at the correct pressure. And the best way to do that is to buy a track pump. The chances of you getting a flat are considerably decreased. In addition, if you do get a flat and you can't fix it, then you can always phone a taxi or phone a friend to come and pick you up. But it's nice to build these strategies into your day so that your ride is not ruined by a mechanical failure. Apart from the fact that you get outside, sunshine undoubtedly makes you smarter. And recent reports on the news have suggested that sunshine is one of the weapons against this particular virus. It's certainly good for our mood. So get out there. Now, I don't know if you came across a story a few weeks ago in the news, but if you're going to get a bike, get a decent lock. This is one of my colleagues who works with me at University Hospital of Wales. He was doing an intensive care unit shift one night and came out to discover that somebody had stolen his bike. So one of his colleagues actually tweeted this, and within about a couple of hours, he'd had offers of bikes from Luke Rowe, who's the professional cyclist on the right, and in fact even Chris Boardman. And this is Tom Roberts. He's my colleague. He's my mate on the left there, picking up his. Luke said you can have one of mine, and what a lovely gesture. It actually even hit the news. I'm not saying that you should go out and get your bike stolen so that you can get Luke Rowe to offer you one. But what I am suggesting is that you buy a decent lock when you buy your bike. This is this is a lock that I've been using for about 15, maybe even longer, maybe 20 years. When I bought it, it was considerably expensive. It was over £100. But touch wood, since I've had the bike, none of my bikes have actually been stolen. Now, what you'll notice looking at this picture is I've locked my helmet and my bike frame and my rear wheel to something that is difficult to move. A note though, the front wheel is still stealable unless you have a lockable skewer on. So I actually keep lockable skewers on my front wheel, which you can't remove, means you can't remove the wheel without a special tool. Unfortunately, when I initially got this bike, when it was brand new and I'd only had it a week or so, I locked it outside the dental hospital, and it was before I'd had a chance to change the skewers. And I came out of one of my lists one day to discover that somebody had stolen the front wheel, which meant I had a rather annoying walk home carrying my bike, and then I had to buy a new front wheel, which was not an insignificant expense. So here are some of my colleagues' methods of locking their bikes. If you'll notice the blue bike in the middle, he's locked the frame quite nicely to the bars, but it means that the wheels are quite easy to remove, particularly with the current use of quick releases that people have. The bike behind has been locked quite nicely, actually. If you look at it, it's the frame is locked. The frame and rear wheel are locked. These are other examples of how I wouldn't recommend you. This is a proper U-lock, but he's actually locked it to the frame, but not secured the wheels in any way. And you may know whose bike this is. This is this is actually a really good U-lock, but the cable locks that he's used to secure the wheels are quite easy to break with a hand tool. So I would recommend that he uses the U-lock, which is the yellow bit, and locks that through frame and rear wheel, and then uses the cable lock just to secure the front wheel. So how far can you cycle? Well, you can start to build up the distance as far as you want. This is my normal commute using Google Maps, and Google Maps will plot a cycle route for you, as you can see. And the example, so the 30, this is from my house to HEIW, it's approximately 5.5 miles, and it reckons it'll take me about 35 minutes. So that's an average person's speed. I don't think it's ever taken me 35 minutes to get from that point to that point. But certainly if you're cycling at that speed, you could probably cycle in normal clothes and you would hardly get sweaty at all. That actual ride is really quite pleasant because most of it is on the Taff Trail, so it's traffic free. It's lovely cycling through the woods in the morning. The sounds are great. You may see a couple of other cyclists out or walkers. And if you certainly cycle at that pace, you're not going to get that sweaty. This Google Maps is great. So wherever you live, this is one of my colleagues who lives in Church Village, you can work out a route that takes you from where you live to where your destination is. And it's quite a nice tool. You can actually set it up on your phone, I suspect, as well, to give you specific instructions should you need them. One of the nice things about Cardiff is they're starting to look at making cycling a bit more popular, and hopefully with the current, one of the potential positives of this current crisis is that when we get back to normal life, or something approximating normal life, we can start to look at better strategies for getting to and from work. And one of those strategies undoubtedly is using bikes. That would decrease the volume of traffic and also make it safer for all of us. Cardiff is very well served, I think, north-south, particularly with the value and the access of the Taff Trail. But they are starting to look at developing superhighways from east to west. In addition, obviously, if you don't live in Cardiff, but you have to get to HIW, and you can get to Cardiff on a train, then you can take the train to the city centre and then cycle from the city centre to HIW. It's a slightly longer ride than mine, but it's still quite a pleasant one, and it's mostly, again, on the Taff Trail. So what do you need? Well, you just actually need two things. You need you and your bike. And most of us have normal gear that we could ride a bike. And this is one of my mates who has offered in the future, when things return to some kind of normality, to run bike maintenance and bike handling skill sessions if people are interested. But this is how he tends to ride if he's riding into town just to do the shopping. He's got a bike there that you can see with the front loader. And this is, he's just wearing a pair of jeans, pair of shoes, and a waterproof jacket, no helmet. This is his wife. He bought this bike for her so that they could go cycling together. What you can't tell from looking at it is it's actually electric. And I've ridden this bike. It's pretty good actually. It goes pretty fast. And this is her leaving for work in the morning. She works in the university. She's got about a 4 or 5 mile ride. She cycles along at 15 miles an hour quite comfortably with minimal effort, dressed as you can see. And this is what tends to happen when you see a cyclist, is they'll be smiling. Interestingly, when she first got this, she was very much a fair weather cyclist. But over the last year or so, she finds that the route and I suppose the mindful aspect of the cycle is that she arrives at work refreshed, and when she's finished at the end of the day, she arrives at home refreshed. And as you can see, she's dressed just completely normally. If you're ready to get into it, you can start to get some serious kit. You can buy serious bikes. There's some very expensive bikes out there. You can get into all sorts of fancy different types of gear. The gear has advantages, particularly if you're cycling long distances. I have special shirts and cycle shorts, particularly because I do tend to ride probably between 50 and 80 miles a week just commuting. I normally wear gloves because it protects my hands, and merino wool socks in your shoes makes your feet a lot less sweaty and more comfortable. I do normally ride a bike with a helmet. Very rarely I don't. I have crashed a couple of times on the road and was very grateful for the fact that the helmet hit the road and not my head. You can buy special shoes which will clip on to the bike. You don't have to. I like them again because I'm riding long distances. It makes it much more comfortable. I always carry lights with me because sometimes if I'm at work I can get caught out. I can end up being at work much later than I think I am, and I tend to ride throughout the winter. So decent set of lights. They're not expensive now. They're really, really much better quality than they used to. The rechargeable ones will often last a few days, and they make you much safer and easier to see. Mentioned the locks already. Get a decent lock. Get a U-lock. They range in price, but the better your U-lock, the less likely that somebody is to steal your bike. They'll hopefully go and steal somebody else's. I carry a spare tube and a pump and a mini tool. Again, if you cycle up to HIW, there's some really, really nice repair stuff actually in the cycle shed. I had a flat the other day, and I ran out of spare tubes because I actually had 2 flats on the way to work because the Taff Trail had been almost washed away by the floods that we had. But when I got to HIW, there was a spare tyre there which I've used, and I will return the tube, one of my spare tubes, to that source so that other people can use them when they need to. Now you can spend a lot of money on kit, and I have done over the years. But actually, if you want to buy cycle-specific kit, Lidl and Aldi often have some really good really good stuff that you can buy there, and it's not expensive. You can kit yourself out probably for under £40 for all those things I've mentioned earlier. Obviously, if you want to spend more, that's up to you. So once you've built a bit more confidence, you may want to think about a couple of further skills, bike maintenance skills. Bikes now are actually quite a lot more reliable than they were 20 years ago. And in fact, the two things that you need to focus on just to keep your bike running sort of reasonably well. One is keep your tire pressures up, and for this, it's best to have a track pump. Again, you can buy one for under a tenner in Lidl. And regularly oil your chain. Don't over oil it, but a dry, rusty chain makes a heck of a noise, and it makes also can make cycling quite unpleasant. More maintenance skills. Well, we can certainly teach those, and hopefully, when things return to some kind of normality, Nick and I would be happy to run classes to perhaps encourage you to do a bit more on the bike. And likewise, we're quite keen on introducing handling skills so that people who feel a little less confident on a bike can break down the skills and improve their bike handling. It makes bike handling it makes the bike cycling much more fun, and also means that you're hopefully a bit more protected and less likely to injure yourself when you're out on the bike. What about what to buy? Well, HEIW currently runs a bike to work cycle scheme, which I encourage you to look at. It's important that you get a bike that fits you. You don't want one that's too big or too small. And I would always buy from a bike shop, A, because I think they need the support, and B, because if there are any issues with the bike, you can take it back. This is my current Steed, which replaces my previous Commuter, which I managed to destroy the frame. It's actually a really nicely designed piece of equipment. And again, I'm amazed. This is the first new bike I've had in about 2 years. I'm amazed how the technology just continues to improve. It actually has front and back hydraulic disc brakes, which are actually fantastic. They work in all weathers. It's got nice large tyres to cope with the terribly shocking potholed roads that we have in Cardiff. I put on a mudguard because I don't particularly like getting that sort of black stripe you get when you ride in the rain. And I also put a water bottle holder on it so that I can carry a water bottle if I'm cycling longer distances. The gearing on it's very simple, and it just works. It's actually a fast, comfortable, efficient piece of equipment, and the bike shop that set it up for me, they've done a superb job actually. They've really made sure that every little bit works. This is one of my colleagues' bikes. The real difference between this one and the one you saw previously is the drop handlebars. You could use this bike that he's bought for pretty much anything. If you change the tyres, you could easily ride a Cyclist Sportif on it. He's got knobbly tyres, a bit like the tyres I've got on the one I showed you previously, which means you can take it off-road, as long as the off-road isn't too technical. But this is pretty much a do-it-all bike, and certainly they're called gravel bikes. They've really hit the scene in the last couple of years, and if you want a bike that does pretty much everything, this is the sort of thing you might want to look at. If you're in a situation where you want to either commute by train or car and buy a bike, something like a folding bike is worth investing in. These are Bromptons. They're a remarkable bit of engineering. I've ridden one a few times actually, and I'm quite a big guy, and I really thought that these would just fold underneath me, but they don't. And when you fold it up into the little sort of clever little bit that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of your picture, they'll fit easily into a car boot. They'll fit easily into a train rack. And they're great bikes. They're a lot of fun to ride, and as I say, the folding component makes them incredibly versatile. You can spend crazy money on bikes. This is a very expensive racing bike, but to be honest, you wouldn't want to commute on something like this. It's great for covering long distances quickly. Certainly in past when I was doing triathlons, I would have had something perhaps not quite as fancy as this. Great for going in a straight line on a flat surface, but pretty rubbish for most other commuting options. You could try a unicycle if you're really crazy, but one of the things I've discovered as somebody who's been trying to learn how to ride one, you can fall off in any directions. and again, they're not terribly versatile. And well, I did have a colleague who did used to ride his to work, which I thought was slightly crazy. These are beginning to come into play. This just looks like a normal racing bike, but it's actually an electric bike. The batteries built into the frame. This is actually a phenomenal piece of kit. And as I said to you earlier, my colleague's wife has got an electric bike and she uses it a lot. I was out riding the other day on my very lightweight racing bike, and I got overtaken by a couple who were chatting away on their electric bikes. It was a bit disconcerting, actually. So you've got something like that, which is a bit more like a racing bike, or you've got something like this. This is a full suspension dual mountain bike, which again is electric. And this is an outrageous bit of fun. They're quite expensive, but in terms of the amount of, it makes going up hills almost enjoyable, and going down hills with the brakes and the suspension really, really fun.